Hello, hello, and welcome to the Art of Effective Management. So, thank you for joining us for our week 3 session. We've gotten some great feedback through our YouTube channel and through our participants who are viewing this. So, we're going to step into week 3 of our 5-week series, and we might even extend the series a little bit because it's going so well. So, let's go ahead and get started. We're about I don't know, 30 seconds away from 10 o'clock. I think we could get the ball rolling. So, if you haven't met me before and haven't joined the series before, and this is your first time, I'm Dr. Myra Austin, and I'll share a little bit about my company, Management Cues, who is hosting this webinar series and other series out there. So, I'm super excited to be here. I love doing these webinar series. It's a great way for us to share some of what we're learning and the experience that I've gained over the past 20 plus years. So, who is Management Cues? So, Management Cues is a management and leadership training company. What makes us different out there is that we're scientifically proven to work and we track performance in the training experience. So, we really give people an opportunity to see how they're doing, where they stand, and we get to see them perform individually and as units. And so, that makes us a little bit different. The thinking behind the concept for management cues really came from me seeing ineffective, boring training out there, and I really wanted to see a return on investment, but also a return on people's time. So that's kind of what started this whole ball game. So for today's agenda, we're going to do a quick overview, a breakdown. We're going to go through some takeaways, and I'll share some resources at the end and close us out. All right, so let's get into it. So, organizing sounds simple, and we're all familiar with people who are organized, right? Organizing as a function of management is slightly different. So, organizing as a function of management is when managers are using organization as a system for performance. It's not necessarily a personality trait, it's not a productivity hack. It's building a system around how you do things as a manager when we're talking about the function. It's about reducing cognitive load for yourself and others, which means making it easier to make decisions, to learn new things, to train, right? So a manager has the ability to do that if they have awareness around this function. It's not about doing more. So sometimes we think doing more is better, but going further faster is actually better, right? So those are the types of things and distinctions we want to make that take a manager from maybe good or talented to great. And that's the difference. It's how work is experienced, not necessarily how things get tracked, right? So making these distinctions make us more effective as managers and also help us build a capacity to lead. And so ultimately makes us better leaders because we have a higher degree of awareness. So how work is experienced? What does that even mean, right? So at Management Cues, we're fascinated with the manager's experience in the workplace, and that not might not be the most exciting thing for everybody, but for us and for me, it's fascinating. So what the experience at work means, it's bringing the manager's plan to life through intentional people resource and work design, right? So it's intentionally aligning those things but getting the most out of them as an outcome. It creates alignment by organizing the talent, the tools toward a common goal, which means you have to be familiar with the talent at the table, how to gauge it, organizing that component, knowing what resources are available to you, and then ultimately what you're trying to work towards as a unit, right? It ensures planned goals are executed in a clear, coordinated, and synchronized way. It's like creating a song, right? It has a rhythm, it has a flow, it feels good, it sounds good, it looks good, right? That's what experience is like. And so, as a manager, if you're not paying attention to the experience, there's impact that's left behind. So, organizing effectively in management really focuses in on a couple of things. Defining clear reporting relationships and lines of authority is a big deal. A lot of time is spent in the workplace arguing, clarifying, re-explaining, right? Going back and reworking things. That is a sign that the organization function isn't what it's supposed to be. Managers are to establish formal communication channels. That means creating a standard around how we communicate, why we communicate, and who we communicate to and when. It's clarifying how individual roles and actions connect to collective outcomes, right? You're bringing order to the environment and to the experience. So, being strategic and systems oriented requires training, discipline, and an understanding of the environment that you're in. Okay, so I don't want to sell it as this comes natural because it definitely doesn't. You have to discipline these areas. It's specifying reporting structures and those accountability lines, and creating defined pathways for communication and information flow. Right? So you're not just looking at how people are communicating, you're looking at how information is stored, how communication is disseminated, and what you do when certain information is no longer relevant, right? That's the organization function. It's aligning individuals and their actions to ensure that they're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason, right? That is coordinated execution. And so it's awareness around those things. So why does organization fail so commonly within our environments and through managers? Well, these top 7 reasons have been reasons that I've seen and observed and researched. So it's not just my opinion, but when there is structure that's lagging behind reality. So what that means is how we do things in the environment aren't necessarily how they should be done. They've never been updated. They've never been audited. They've never been renewed, reinvented, innovated around. And so that usually starts to impact organization, and organization becomes difficult, right? When roles are unclear and are overlapping. I've seen this in really dynamic, complex environments where there's too much overlap within roles because job descriptions aren't clear. And so, next week we'll be talking about the staffing role, and I'll touch on some of those areas. But all of this also is very closely aligned with organization. When communication is informal, inconsistent, or reactive. If it's go, 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 we're working on a fire right now. We can't pay attention to that, right? That's not important. That's not our priority. And really, that's probably what would solve an issue long term. It's that impacts organization. When accountability is personal instead of structural, right? We blame people. Stop doing that. That's not how we do things, right? But you're not looking at the overall impact or maybe the root cause of why that keeps happening over and over again, or why multiple people are experiencing the same dilemma, right? Or running into the same issue. When workload exceeds human capacity, when we don't understand our capacity, how to track it, how to measure it, how to allocate it, when we don't solve that issue, that continues to impact the business and burn people out. So the impact on the business is you end up leaving money on the table, and you're actually creating a cost and risk when that happens. The individual challenge with that is that you probably burn your best players out. And so because there's a lack of organization, your best players get burnt out, and then you're stuck with the people who are not prepared, are not a fit, or are going to quit because they're not going to be as committed as people who maybe are overachievers or feel an emotional commitment to the company. So when tools replace thinking, right? When these are the tools we use and you don't allow people to provide feedback, you don't allow people to suggest new feedbacks or test new tools that are better and more in line with keeping things orderly or accessible, we're missing out on that organization piece, and it fails. Organization fails. When managers stop acting actively around organization, they don't even think about it. It's not a thing. They're too busy reacting, right? And of course, at that point, organization goes out the window and we don't get the benefit of it. So let's break each of these down because they're really important to understand, and they're tactical things, right? These are things we all experience as managers in every environment. So what happens when structure lags behind reality? When structure lags behind reality, the organization is literally in a design that has been created for a past version of that company. It no longer meets the current demands. right? So it's almost like you're living in the twilight zone and we're not paying attention to it. We're just going through the motions. The neuroscience impact of that is that mismatch creates constant cognitive friction. We constantly create issues in people's mind and being and state of being because they're forced to improvise, they're forced to do quick fixes, they're forced to have to make it fit, right? Those types of environments are not conducive to productivity or success. So the signals, what to look for as managers, when there's too many workarounds and that becomes the norm, right? A workaround is great when there's an exception to the rule, not when workarounds are needed all the time. Decisions get stuck or bypassed. And I mentioned this before in one of our prior sessions. If making decisions take weeks, you have to get your functions down around your management and your leadership team. There's something not working there, right? And it's holding the whole company back. High performers are observing the chaos. We rely on these high performers to take care of it, to fix it, to do it right. If you have that kind of mentality, I'm just going to have so and so do it right. Yeah, there's a management and leadership issue there if that's the default mentality. So, number two, when roles are unclear or overlapping, this one I see come up so often, all the time. So, what happens? People don't know who owns what at the end of the day, or too many people own the same thing, which creates conflict, right? You walk right into that problem. You're creating and generating. And so that's when the manager becomes a cost to the business and not an asset, right? The neuroscience of that is that anytime there's a lack of clarity, anytime there's ambiguity, that triggers the threat response in the brain. And nobody has any control over that. That's just the human response to absence of certainty. Anytime somebody doesn't know what's going to happen next, the threat response is activated in our brains. And in the workplace, we constantly make decisions, right? So it creates decision fatigue where we get exhausted by having to make these ridiculous decisions where things should be smooth and clear and there should be a flow. So, what signals should we look for as managers? Look for the things people say, right? We call them cues at management cues, which could be behavioral cues, verbal cues, any type of cue that a manager should be dialed into. So, things like, I thought you had that, duplicated or missed work, interpersonal tension. These are the things that flag us that there's not enough organization in the environment, or at least it's not being executed in a streamlined way or in an effective way. Let's look at number three. So when communication is informal, inconsistent, or reactive, so much happens. I remember actually stepping into an environment many years ago, maybe even almost a decade ago. And the first thing the CEO told me was, oh, it's like the Wild West out here. And in my mind, I was like, oh, that absolutely has to do with leadership, right? It shouldn't be the Wild West. If it's the Wild West, we don't know our functions and we are not realizing them, right? So what happens in that scenario? Information moves through side conversations, through emergencies, or whoever happens to be available, right? It's like we're grasping at straws. The neuroscience impact there is the unpredictability, again, activates the threat response and puts us in this heightened alert state. So that heightened alert state is not a fun state to stay in, right? It's also not healthy. So what are the signals their manager should look for? Constant interruptions, meetings to fix miscommunication, information hoarding, and overloading, right? So it becomes this kind of chaotic us versus them environment. There's information in pieces, fragmented information, and you're having meetings around the dumbest things, right? It's almost like meetings too organized, but you don't quite get there. And you shouldn't be having meetings about that. That should be embedded in the infrastructure, right? So this is where we start to build these kind of behaviors that work against organization. So when accountability is personal instead of structural. So I can tell you that in my experience, I have seen overachievers burnt out constantly. I've seen, they're just exceptional talent. They thrive in this space. To me, that's really passing the buck as a leader, because what you need is stability in the environment, right? Yes, you will always have people who step above and beyond, are talented, are gifted, but structuring the work, organizing the workload, not knowing the capacity, and giving the overachievers, 50% of the load, and then dividing the remaining 50% among the other five that you consider to be mediocre or incompetent or untrained. That is just unfair. Right. And so what happens? Managers rely on reminders, follow-ups, and pressure rather than clear systems. Right. Neuroscience impact there is people experience monitoring as threat rather than support. So people again start to feel pressured because it becomes a personal thing. It becomes about who they are, not necessarily what's happening in the environment. And so, what do you look for in that type of a situation? What is the red flag? So the red flag is micromanagement, defensive behavior, and reduced ownership, right? And those are outcomes of handling things this way and taking it from a structural position to a personal position. So number 5, what happens when workload exceeds human capacity? Right? We have to be realistic if we're going to be good managers, but we cannot be realistic if we don't know what the workload looks like and how to spread it out in a way that makes sense for the business and can be profitable, right? So again, this is not something that comes natural. This is something you have to be trained on. Learning how to gauge capacity is hard, especially in very complex environments. So what happens? Too much work is assigned without regard for cognitive limits, right? Because we are not robots, right? Because we're human beings, there are limitations to when we are productive and when we stop being productive. Capacity is something that helps us gauge that based on the industry and the environment that we're in. So the neuroscience impact there is chronic overload actually shuts down the executive function and increases error rates. So in your environment, if you manage around error rates, any kind of error rate or rework or anything like that, organization is actually what you should be focusing more on, because that's what's going to impact these error rates in a positive way, which would be a decrease in error rates, right? So what are the signals? The signals are burnout, short-term thinking, and declining quality. The manager is always in a tough spot because executive leadership or higher senior level leadership is responsible for strategy, right? For long-term planning, for execution long-term, and middle managers and entry-level managers are typically more in tune with day-to-day execution. But the smart manager is always going to have a component of long-term in their thinking, right? And not just be short-term, because that limits the impact of what you're seeing. And you, again, as managers, have some of the best, most valuable, amazing feedback out there. So let's keep going. Number 6, when tools replace thinking. Right. And I can't help but think of AI. There's so much AI can do, but there's so much AI doesn't do and doesn't do well. And when managers and leaders aren't preparing people for this and anticipating this, they're walking into chaos. They're walking into risk. They're walking into negligence, right? So what happens when we're over reliant on tools? More tools are added instead of fixing underlying structure. So I've seen tools be thrown at teams and not properly trained on them. I've seen tools be that it's going to fix everything type of approach and it's not properly implemented. I've seen tools be thrown into environments that they were not a good fit for. They were just not intended for that environment. So part of organization is making sure that the puzzle fits, right? The puzzle piece fits. So neuroscience impact there is fragmentation increases context switching and mental fatigue. We mentally exhaust people. And as managers, if we have a say, if we have feedback, if we have control over what gets put into our environment, we should definitely speak up when something is not a good fit, because you're actually working against yourself and expectations that you're later going to be held to. So here are some signals around that. Multiple systems for the same work. I didn't see it type of problems. There's no visibility, there's no transparency, and a low adoption. When people refuse to use it, don't know how to use it, haven't been trained on how to use it, those are all signs of us trying to throw a tool at something that actually needs to be disciplined. Number 7, I believe this is our last one, when managers stop actively organizing. So one, even if you started to participate in the function of organizing, but you let it go because you became a victim of culture, or you were never trained, or this is just something that's not on your radar, right? This is what happens. Organization is treated as a one-time setup instead of an ongoing management responsibility. And remember, at the beginning, we shared that organization as a function of management is a system for performance. So it's a forever thing. It's a forever commitment. You just get better and better at it. And so you work on your awareness. So the neuroscience impact of just letting it go and forgetting about it and not including it in how you work is that the brain experiences uncertainty and instability, and you get stuck in this mode of chaos internally, which reduces the effectiveness around your own decision making. So the signals to look for there is reactive leadership. Reactive leadership points to several different problems, and as you break it down, you start to see where the weaknesses are across the functions. Firefighting culture, right? Planning without execution. There's all this talk about planning. There's all this talk about how we're going to do it, or what we want to do, but the execution just plain sucks, right? For lack of a better, more sophisticated term. And we know when that happens. We're living through it, right? And sometimes we just don't know what to do about it, right? So working on the organization function is it. So that's a little bit about, in a nutshell, of what happens when things go wrong. Let's talk about and dive into organizing effectively and what you can use and how you should use it as a manager to just be more effective, and to start working on that awareness and thinking of organizing every day that you're in that role, right? So this is a quick checklist. You're going to get a copy of this deck. I would also take a quick screenshot. This is a responsibilities checklist for managers around just having that mentality of organization, right? Determining necessary priorities and activities. Grouping company activities for right departments and roles. Assigning the appropriate authority and responsibility to team members or other managers. Developing working relationships between leaders and team members to remain on track. Communicating policies, procedures, and guidance to keep execution and roles clear. And this, of course, is just framing it, right? You can break it down, customize it to what's happening to your environment. But if you stick to this checklist, you're at least working on your awareness, if nothing else. Okay, that's the place to start, is awareness. Once you have awareness, you can't unsee it, and you tend to move in a more effective direction. So human-centered and focused. Make reporting relationships explicit and transparent. Set clear expectations for how communication happens and show how each person's work fits the larger picture, the larger system, right? What are they contributing and why? It's a very important question to be able to answer for your team. That's what you get. That's where you get the buy-in, right? So what organization does for your manager brain? What does it actually do for you, right? Some of what we talked about impacts the team in certain ways, right? Creating that threat response. What happens to you as a manager is also incredibly important, and actually what I'm the most fascinated with. So it reduces cognitive load when you master this function. It lowers the threat response and your stress. Managers are constantly stressed because they're under pressure, they're managing multiple things, right? They're trainers, therapists, leaders, you're all of that, right? It preserves your executive function. So organization helps you make better decisions because you're safeguarding the part of the brain that has to make the decisions and has to be fresh and ready to go, right? It improves focus and attention. You actually pay attention to what matters when you work on the organization function and become really, really good at it. So what happens to the teams, right? To your teams. When you as a manager become really good at the organization function, your team experiences something because of it too. It creates that clarity and accountability that we talked about. It increases engagement and motivation, and that we've actually tested in training with Neuron, the neuroscience and neuroengineers that tested our program. Reduces burnout and overload, right? So they feel better about the work that they're doing, hence they do better, they do more. And it builds trust and psychological safety. The threat response is deactivated, which means they are more productive, right? More engaged, more motivated. So how managers stay organized and protect the brain capacity, right? Your brain is incredibly important because you have all of these insights, you know your industry, you're doing multiple things. We need to get the most out of you, right? And so here's the impact that you want to look for when you're trying to protect brain capacity. You want to prioritize what actually matters. You want to externalize work using a single system. So you want to get rid of fragmentation as much as possible. You want to translate work into clear, actionable tasks. You want to set clear, time bound goals. You want to block time for organizational thinking. And if that's probably the one thing I see happen the least with managers at every level is to be able to block time just to think about what's happening, right? Delegate to reduce cognitive overload, not just workload. So again, there's a right way and a wrong way to delegate, which we do a lot of training around. But you want to make sure you're effectively delegating the right things in the right moment for the right reason. Hold regular check-ins and recalibrate. Use technology intentionally, right? Don't just use technology because it's there or because it's forced on you. Really try to understand it and provide feedback as to whether it's a fit or not. Maintain a clean and predictable workspace. Such a simple thing, but I've seen such messy areas that just lend to what's happening, right? It either contributes or takes away from the experience that people are having. And so awareness around that is super important. So, organization and prioritization. So, today I'm going to share some tools, all of which you can test and try. I'm going to focus on one of them more than the others because it's one that we train on often, and I've used in the workplace, in the field quite often because it's simple, but it helps us frame our state of mind around organization and prioritization. So, these are the tools that I'm going to share with you today. Okay, these are great for management. You have to decide what's a good fit for you, what works in your environment, what works for you personally, right? So the Eisenhower matrix, which helps with urgent versus important prioritization, that's the one I'm going to focus on. Top 3 priorities rule, and I'm going to explain what these are. Impact versus effort matrix. Objectives and key results, which are different from KPIs, and it is important to know when to use it and why. The RACI matrix, which doesn't work all the time for everything. I've seen the RACI matrix used terribly wrong in organizations. Time blocking, that is a strategic thing. It is a tool. Kanban reports, which is for workflow management. Decision filters, yes, no criteria. So simple, so effective to get the noise out of the way. And weekly priority resets. Capacity planning will be the last thing that we look at. Okay, so here we go. The Eisenhower matrix and how to use it. So the Eisenhower matrix I use in training. I've used with my students in business school for undergraduate and graduate students. And I've used it for teams that I've managed myself directly with managers and their teams. So it works at every level, which is why I love it. It's simple. It's best used for daily and weekly prioritization. That is what you should be using it for. Why it works from a brain perspective, it forces binary decisions, which reduces ambiguity and decision fatigue. It makes it really easy too. It's visual, so everybody typically can understand it pretty quickly. This is how you use it. You look at it from a do now and you put it in the urgent and important bucket. You put things in a schedule, which is important but not necessarily urgent. You delegate things that are urgent but not important, right? And you eliminate if neither of these things are true, right? So this is what you want to watch out for. If everything feels urgent, then the system is definitely broken. And it exposes structural issues pretty quickly. And the Eisenhower matrix can lead you to that conversation, right? Which could mean you escalate it or schedule a meeting with, a higher level leadership to let them know where the breakdown is happening if you need them to make a decision. So here's a quick matrix infographic we created that we train on. We also have tools on our website that we sell that you can use to physically use with your team for training. But this is what it looks like, right? You have your urgent, important bucket. You have your not urgent, but still important bucket, which needs to be scheduled. And then at the bottom half, you have not important, but you need to delegate it. It still needs to happen, right? Like picking up the trash, right? It's not going to break the business, but it still needs to happen so that everybody's in a hygienic environment, right? Delete it. It's low value, it's not necessary, it doesn't have to be done, just get rid of it, right? Once it moves up the ladder of importance, then you focus on it. We can't do everything for everybody, so it is very important to prioritize. Okay, so the top 3 priorities rule. Best for executive focus and overload reduction. So if you're in a more senior team, right, you have to safeguard your brain and your cognitive load because there's a lot to look for, a lot to do. Why it works. The brain performs best for limited focal points. Realistically, the brain can only successfully focus on about 3 to 5 things of priority, period, right? So more than 3 to 5 priorities actually start to increase your cognitive strain. So knowing that should help you just bucket these things so that you're not overwhelming yourself on purpose, right? So the manager uses this: identify top 3 outcomes for the day or the week and align it with your team, right? Such a simple thing. That's how you do it. It's everything. If everything is top 3, nothing is, right? If everything is top 3, you don't know how to prioritize and need to discipline that muscle, right? Practice, that's where it needs to start to happen. And then your team will fall in line once you do it. The impact versus effort matrix, that's best for strategic planning and resource allocation. And here's why it works. It helps the brain evaluate value without emotional bias. So you start to separate the emotional piece from the transactional piece. And the manager uses this: high impact, low effort. Those are quick wins. And I use this along with one of my colleagues when we're doing design thinking and problem solving. Right? It helps me separate the things that might be taking up too much space or making too much noise for us. Right? High impact and high effort. Those are strategic investments. Right? So what you want to look out for is avoid over prioritizing easy work at the expense of meaningful work. You have to know where to make the distinction, right? And so again, if everything feels important, nothing is, right? OKRs, objectives and key results. So again, these are very different from KPIs and should be treated differently. These are best for aligning priorities across teams. Why it works? Because clear objectives reduce uncertainty and threat response because it's the North Star, right? So manager uses this: set 3 to 5 objectives, tie measurable outcomes to each. Keep in mind, it's this 3 to 5 window. And if you've noticed, there's a pattern. The brain cannot handle 10 and 20 objectives. It's actually very unrealistic to do that, right? You're already overburdening just by listing anything over 5, in my opinion. So watch out for OKRs that fail when treated as performance pressure instead of clarity tools. If you have OKRs and you're treating it as a performance measurement tool, you're using it wrong. That's not what it's for. It's for direction versus performance, right? And I see that happen all the time. RACI matrix. So I'm actually not a big fan of the RACI matrix, and I always share this, but it is useful if you're using it in the right way. So it's best for prioritization through ownership clarity. That's literally what it's best for, only to clarify who owns what, right? So why does it work? It works because role clarity reduces cognitive load and conflict. But if your RACI doesn't do that, you're not doing it right. Right? You're not implementing it right. You're not training around it right. You're not communicating about it correctly, which has been what I've seen in my experience. Here's the manager use: define who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed around that area, okay, or role or function. It prevents duplicate or neglected work. So if the RACI matrix is not doing that, you're not doing it right, right? So this is what you want to watch out for: overcomplication. Keep it lightweight. I've seen the RACI matrix so complicated, it defeats the purpose it was intended for. So watch out for that. Time blocking. It's best for protecting focus and execution time. This is a great way to be disciplined around your management impact. I love time blocking and I've used it strategically for over 20 years. Why it works. The brain needs predictability to enter into deep focus. You need to know that your time is valuable as a manager and that the deep focus is going to lend to better outcomes. And that has to weigh in your mind, in your mindset for you to really use this in the right way. So the manager uses this. You want to block time for strategic thinking, batch meetings, and admin work. This is what you want to look out for. You want to leave buffer space. Over scheduling increases stress, right? So for me personally, I know that what works for me is 1 day a week of time blocking, and it's typically an hour and a half for me. That works for me, right? You have to figure out what works for you. But it has to make sense. It has to be done strategically, and it cannot be overdone or not done enough, right? It has to be consistent. So Kanban report boards, visual workflow, which I love working on workflows in the work environments, but therefore protecting focus and execution time. And here's why it works. The brain needs predictability to enter into that deep focus, right? So you want to make sure that your workflow is managed and it makes sense. So decision filters, yes, no criteria, preventing priority creep. Pre-decided criteria reduces emotional and reactive decisions. For manager use, you want to ask, does this align with current goals? Do we have capacity? What drops if we say yes? And you want to watch out for every time you're revisiting the filters. If you're constantly changing the goal, you're not clear on what the goal is, right? So this only works if it stays consistent and you're honestly able to say yes or no. So the weekly priority reset, simple. It's ongoing recalibration. That's what it's for. Why it works for the brain. The brain needs closure and reset cycles. The manager uses this. You want to review what moved forward, reset top priorities, and remove or defer low value work. What you want to look out for is skipping that leads to quiet overload that sneaks up on you, right? Don't skip. Don't skip. Make sure you're consistent. And last but certainly never least, capacity planning. That's intended to prevent burnout. So if you have a burnout issue in your environment, you have to figure out what type of capacity planning works in your environment, right? And this might be a collaborative effort, a senior strategic effort. You might need a professional to help you in your environment, but it'll likely point to other areas that have bottlenecks in them, right? But this is why it works. It acknowledges human cognitive limits, right? It takes us from unrealistic and we want to meet these goals, to here's what we can actually do. And this is what historically our data shows, right? Manager uses this planning based on realistic availability and factoring meetings, interruptions, and recovery time, right? If those things aren't being factored in to what people can actually achieve, you actually don't know what they can achieve, right? And so you want to watch out for ignoring capacity, because that's the fastest path to failure, right? That's the fastest way to miss out and create costs for the business or leave revenue on the table. So here are our key takeaways for today. Prioritization is a brain protection strategy, not a productivity trick. This is about continuity, consistency, and having that awareness around the importance of organizing. Number two, fewer priorities lead to stronger performance, not more, right? So in the case of the OKRs, having more than 5 OKRs is stepping into failure. That's just the way it is, right? From a human standpoint, it's unrealistic. Number three, structure beats willpower every time. Structure is reliable. Structure makes things easier. Structure is easy to train on, right? So you can't beat it. Number four, clarity of ownership is a form of prioritization, right? So being clear on what you own and what you're responsible for, that's a form of prioritizing what's important, right? And you're part of that equation. Number five, managers must continuously reset priorities as conditions change. That's the challenge with management, right? Is that we respond in the now. We should consider future. But we have to adapt constantly. And that's why you're so wonderful. And that's why I'm fascinated with the management experience. So, with that said, we've arrived at the Q&A section, almost at the end. I'll leave the chat section open and I'll take a look at our streaming live on YouTube to see if there are any questions, and then I'll step into the close. Okay, so I'll give you a few seconds. It looks like we're okay, but if you have any questions, let me know. You're always free to email me or schedule a one-on-one consultation in private. And here are our training and support resources for you today. You'll get access to the session recording if you are registered for the training for the webinar. You'll get a copy of the webinar deck if you registered, and we have training programs available online. We have a management planner that captures the leadership and management function of things. We have neuroscience studies of the work that we've done to prove that we're scientifically backed. And of course, I offer a free 1-hour consultation for anybody that wants to chat with me and talk about maybe how we can support you. And we have membership programs. Our membership programs are incredibly awesome. They give you support month to month and access at the individual level, at the team level, at the executive, and now at the nonprofit world and level too. So we have until January 31st for anybody who would want to enroll in a custom or in a formal program. 30% off has been a hit this year. So I'm happy and excited to share it's working for people, and they're getting that awesome discount and enrolling before the 31st. So with that said, our next session is going to be on January 30th, and we're going to be covering the controversial function that I mentioned, the staffing strategies, building high-performing and resilient teams, and the management role within that, right? It's not an HR function. It's a management function, and HR is a partner in that space, right? So learning that distinction is incredibly important. And again, it's a largely debated area and one that's often missed in terms of management impact. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you have some great takeaways and that this was helpful for you. If it was, please let me know. I love your feedback, and let me know if this is serving you and if you're enjoying the webinar series, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have an excellent weekend.